Welcome to today's deep dive. We are getting into something today that completely shatters how you probably think about success. We're looking at excerpts from Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money.
And it is such a fascinating read.
It really is. Our mission today is to essentially shortcut our way to being well informed about why financial success isn't, a hard science like physics. It's actually a soft skill driven entirely by human behavior.
Yeah, it's all about how you act, not necessarily what you know.
Right. And to set this up, I want you to picture two men. On one hand, you have Ronald Reed. He was a humble janitor and a gas station attendant up in rural Vermont.
Just a completely regular working class guy.
Exactly. He was the first person in his family to graduate high school. He chopped firewood for fun, lived in this tiny house. But, and here's the crazy part, when he died at age 92, he left behind a fortune of $8 million.
Which is just staggering.
Right. And then on the other hand, you have Richard Fiscone. He was this Harvard-educated, incredibly successful executive at Merrill Lynch.
A guy who, on paper, did absolutely everything right.
Yeah. He retired in his 40s, bought an 18,000 square foot mansion with 2 elevators and 7 garages. And yet, following the 2008 financial crisis, Fiscone went completely bankrupt.
Wow.
His mansion was sold in a foreclosure auction for pennies on the dollar, right around the exact same time Ronald Reed, the janitor, was leaving millions to a local hospital and library.
That contrast right there completely breaks the mold of how we value education and expertise. You really have to ask yourself, in what other industry on earth does someone with zero formal background, no education, and no connections massively outperform the most highly trained experts?
You literally never see that anywhere else.
Never. You would never read a story about a janitor who just happens to perform a better heart transplant than a Harvard-trained surgeon.
No, of course not.
You'd never see a gas station attendant design a skyscraper that structurally outperforms the work of top architects. It's an absurd premise, but it happens in finance.
It really does.
And the reason it happens is that finance is entirely unique. How you behave with your money matters exponentially more than the technical formulas you memorize.
So to understand why people behave the way they do with money, we first have to realize a very comforting truth, which is that no one is actually crazy.
Right.
People do destructive things with their finances, sure, but they are just reacting to the world through a microscopic lens of their own life. The text points out that your personal experience makes up maybe 0.000000001% of what has actually happened in the world.
It's basically nothing.
Right, but it shapes about 80% of how you think the world works. Like, think about your own financial lens right now. If you entered the job market during the 2008 crash, your risk tolerance is wired completely differently than someone who graduated into the 2015 bull market.
Oh, absolutely.
You aren't operating on pure math. You're operating on your own generational scar tissue.
And we see this distortion play out at the highest levels of history, too. Take John F. Kennedy, for example.
Oh, this is a great example.
Yeah, so when he was running for president in 1960, someone asked him what he remembered about the Great Depression. And his honest answer was that he had zero firsthand knowledge of it.
Wait, he didn't even notice the Depression.
Not really. His family was extremely wealthy, and their fortune actually grew during the 1930s. The only tangible impact he saw was his father hiring extra gardeners just to give people a job so they could eat.
That is wild.
He literally had to learn about the Depression by reading about it at Harvard. Meanwhile, millions of Americans were permanently scarred by the financial terror of that era, and their future president had no emotional concept of it. They were looking at the exact same economy through completely different lenses.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you apply that lens concept to everyday decisions, suddenly behaviors that look completely irrational start to make a strange kind of sense.
Like what?
Like lottery tickets. The lowest income households in the U.S. spend an average of $400 a year on lottery tickets.
It sounds like a lot.
It is a lot, especially because 40% of Americans cannot come up with $400 in an emergency.
Oh, wow. So the exact same people blowing their safety net on a 1 in a million chance are the ones who desperately need that money for like a blown tire or a medical bill.
Exactly. On paper, it is terrible math, but they aren't buying math. For someone trapped in poverty, paying for a lottery ticket is buying a tangible dream.
Right. A way out.
Yeah. They are purchasing a fleeting moment of hope to get the security and comfort that wealthy people already take for granted.
They are plugging the limited information and resources they have into their own unique mental model of the world. And that brings us to the invisible forces that constantly distort those models, which are luck and risk.
The twin siblings.
Exactly. I like to think of them as twin siblings.
Ugh.
They represent the reality that every outcome in life is guided by forces completely outside of our individual effort. Take Bill Gates. Staggeringly smart, incredibly hardworking guy.
Sure.
But he also experienced a 1 in a million stroke of luck. In 1968, he happened to attend Lakeside School,
Which was like the only school with a computer, right?
one of the only high schools in the entire world that had a computer. Out of roughly 303 million high school-age kids globally at that time, maybe 300 of them had access to a computer like that. That head start was vital to Microsoft's creation.
But the narrative gets really complicated when you look at his best friend at Lakeside, Kent Evans.
Right. Kent was just as smart and just as ambitious as Gates. Gates even said they were scheming to be CEOs together.
But Kent experienced an equally powerful dose of luck's twin sibling, which is risk.
Yeah. He died at a mountaineering accident before he even graduated high school.
It's so tragic.
It is. And the odds of being killed on a mountain in high school are roughly 1 in a million. It is the exact same force, the exact same magnitude of probability that Gates experienced, just working in the opposite direction.
I have to push back a little on how society handles this, though, because it is incredibly dangerous how blindly we idolize extreme successes without acknowledging those twin siblings.
What do you mean?
Well, we just look at the outcome and assume it was 100% skill. Take Cornelius Vanderbilt or John D. Rockefeller.
Okay.
Vanderbilt was told by an advisor that all of his railroad expansion deals were breaking the law. And he basically said, "What do I care about the law? Ain't I got the power?"
Right. Just totally brazen.
Yeah. And we look back and praise him as this bold, scrappy visionary who didn't let red tape stop innovation. But think about the mechanism of luck there. If a single judge had decided to make an example of him and shut him down early on, we would call him a reckless criminal.
That's a great point. The line between a bold genius and a foolish criminal is sometimes just a millimeter of luck.
Exactly. We study these extreme outliers to figure out what to do with our money, but we end up trying to emulate unrepeatable luck.
Which highlights the need to focus on what we can actually control. Since we cannot dictate luck, and we can't reliably replicate outlier success, the only dependable variable left is time.
Time is the ultimate equalizer.
It really is. But to truly harness time, we have to understand how compounding actually builds up, and we have to stop trying to be perfectly rational robots.
I love this part. We usually think of massive wealth requiring massive, bold actions. But there's an analogy in the text about how ice ages start that completely changed how I view this.
Oh, the snow analogy.
Yes. For a long time, scientists thought ice ages must be triggered by tremendous forces, massive earthquakes or volcanic eruptions.
Something super dramatic.
Right. But a meteorologist named Vladimir Kupin figured out the subtle mechanism. Ice ages don't start with brutally cold winters. They start with moderately cool summers.
A summer that isn't quite warm enough to melt the previous winter's snow.
Exactly. That leaves a tiny base layer of ice. That base reflects sunlight away from the Earth, which cools the planet a tiny bit more, which makes the next winter's snow stick around even longer.
Reflecting even more light.
Yeah. And within a geological blink of an eye, the entire planet is covered in miles-thick ice. It is confounding compounding, a small starting base leading to extraordinary results.
And that mechanism is the exact blueprint for Warren Buffett's wealth.
Oh, totally.
People write thousands of books analyzing his specific investment strategies, his market timing, his stock picks, but they miss the simplest mathematical fact. Of his roughly $84.5 billion net worth, $81.5 billion of it came after his 65th birthday.
That stat always blows my mind.
It's unreal. His secret isn't just that he's a highly skilled investor, it's that he has been investing since he was 10 years old. His skill is the cool summer, but his secret weapon is time.
And if you compare him to someone like Jim Simons, the head of Renaissance Technologies, the contrast is stark.
Right. Simons compounded his money at an astronomical 66% annually since 1988. No one comes close to that rate of return. Buffett is at roughly 22%.
Yet Simons is 75% less rich than Buffett.
Exactly. The underlying mechanism is simply that Simons didn't find his investment stride until he was 50 years old. He had less than half as many years to let that compounding snowball roll.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, though. To stay in the game long enough for that compounding to work, you have to survive market crashes, panics, and recessions.
You have to stick around.
Yeah, and the book argues that to survive, you actually shouldn't try to be coldly rational. I want to push back on standard financial advice here because every textbook out there tells you to be a calculating, emotionless math machine with your portfolio.
But textbooks completely ignore human psychology.
Yeah.
Aiming to be reasonable is far more effective than aiming to be mathematically rational. There was a perfect medical example to illustrate this.
The syphilis one.
Yeah, in the early 1900s, a psychiatrist named Julius Wagner Jurag noticed that patients with a fatal disease neurosyphilis sometimes recovered if they happened to get a severe fever from another illness.
Oh, okay.
So he did something incredibly rational but terrifying.
Okay.
He intentionally injected syphilis patients with malaria.
Wait, he purposely gave them malaria?
Yes, because he knew that the malaria-induced bone-rattling fevers, and fevers literally burn out the infection. He actually won a Nobel Prize for it.
Yeah, that is insane.
Scientifically, rationally, it makes perfect sense to want a fever if you have a fatal infection.
Yeah.
But to a patient shivering in bed, hallucinating in pain, it is completely unreasonable because fevers hurt, and humans are biologically wired to avoid pain.
Applying that to finance, I have to bring up Harry Markowitz. He is the pioneer of modern portfolio theory. He literally won a Nobel Prize for figuring out the mathematical trade-off between risk and return.
The math genius.
Exactly. But when he was asked how he invested his own retirement money back in the 1950s, he didn't use his own complex formulas. He just split his money 50-50 between stocks and bonds.
Which goes against his own theory.
Totally. When asked why, he said his intention was to minimize future regret. He just wanted to sleep at night. He knew that if the market tanked, his bonds would protect him. If the market soared, his stocks would capture the upside.
Because loving a specific investment or keeping a massive pile of cash that loses to inflation might look completely irrational on a spreadsheet. But if that cash gives you the emotional endurance to not panic and sell everything during a 40% market crash, then it is highly reasonable.
That emotional endurance is the entire game. If the goal is to stick around long enough for the compounding ice age to take over, then the ultimate financial skill isn't actually getting wealthy. It is staying wealthy in an inherently chaotic world.
Getting money requires taking risks, being optimistic, and putting yourself out there. Keeping money requires the exact opposite. It requires a healthy dose of paranoia and an obsession with survival.
The story of Jesse Livermore captures that transition perfectly. In October 1929, during the worst stock market crash in history, Livermore had shorted the market.
And for those unfamiliar, shorting essentially means he placed massive, leveraged bets that stock prices would fall.
Right. So he went home to a family that was crying, thinking they were ruined. Instead, he told them he just had his best trading day ever. He made the equivalent of $3 billion in a single day.
$3 billion. That's unbelievable.
Meanwhile, another man, a real estate mogul named Abraham Germansky, lost absolutely everything in that same crash and disappeared in despair. Livermore was a genius at getting wealthy. But fast forward to 1933, Livermore's overconfidence led him to make bigger and bigger bets.
And he lost it all.
Yep. Went completely broke and tragically took his own life. He fundamentally failed at staying wealthy.
Because he lacked a margin of safety. A margin of safety is the psychological and mathematical gap between what you think will happen and what can happen while still leaving you okay.
Like having an emergency fund.
Exactly. It means having enough cash reserves to cover a lost job so you aren't forced to sell your stocks at the absolute bottom of a crash. It means avoiding heavy leverage. The reason a margin of safety is so critical is because of how outcomes are actually distributed in the real world. We expect effort to equal reward in a linear, predictable way. But finance is driven by tail events, outliers.
A 1 in a million hits.
Yeah. Look at the art dealer Heinsberg Gruen. He amassed a billion-dollar collection of Picassos and Matisses. He wasn't psychic, and he wasn't picking winners one by one. He operated like an index fund,
Just buying everything.
buying massive quantities of art, fully expecting that 99% of it would be completely worthless or mediocre. But the 1% that turned out to be masterpieces paid for the 99% of duds.
Wow.
Or look at Walt Disney. By the mid-1930s, Disney had produced over 400 cartoons, and most of them were financial disasters. His studio was on the brink of bankruptcy.
And then what happened?
Then came Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It made $8 million in 6 months, paid off all the company's debts, bought them a new studio, and transformed the business forever. The 83 minutes of Snow White were the long tail that paid for everything else.
It applies directly to the stock market, too.
Okay.
The Russell 3000 index, which tracks thousands of public companies, grew 73-fold over a recent period. but 40% of the companies in that index effectively failed and lost most of their value.
So almost half were losers.
Almost half. The entire massive gain of the index was driven by just a 7% tail of mega winners. But living through that is agonizing. It's easy to look back at the 73-fold gain, but living through it means waking up every day and seeing nearly half the companies in your portfolio bleeding money.
Right, human instinct screams at you to sell the losers.
Yeah, to abandon the strategy before the 7% tail winners can actually do their job. I find understanding this incredibly liberating for you, the listener. You can be wrong half the time, or even more than half the time, and still make an absolute fortune.
That's so true.
The text uses a brilliant analogy with Chris Rock. You watch a flawless Chris Rock comedy special on Netflix, and he looks like an untouchable genius. But you don't see the dozens of tiny comedy clubs he bombed in over the previous year to test out those jokes.
The failures, the duds, the bad investments, they're just the hidden, completely normal cost of achieving that tail event success. And once you accept that reality, once you survive the chaos, ride out the long tails, and actually build wealth, it forces a philosophical reckoning. What is the actual point? Why endure the psychological pain of the market?
That's the million-dollar question.
The default assumption in our culture is that the point of wealth is to buy luxury goods. But the real answer is that the point of wealth is to buy freedom.
Because if you don't use it for freedom, you end up moving the goalpost. And
Right.
moving the goalpost is a disease. Look at Rajat Gupta, the former CEO of McKinsey, or Bernie Madoff.
Oh, Madoff is a perfect example.
Right. Before Madoff's infamous Ponzi scheme, he ran a legitimate, wildly successful market-making business that was pulling in $25 to $50 million a year. Both of these men were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They had unimaginable wealth, prestige, and power.
And yet they threw it all away.
They risked their actual freedom for a little bit more. It wasn't just greed, it was the trap of social comparison. They were comparing themselves to multi-billionaires and felt broke by comparison. They had no sense of the word enough.
And that social comparison trap leads directly into what the author calls the man-in-the-car paradox.
Oh, I love this one.
When you see someone driving a brand new Ferrari, you almost never look at the driver and think, wow, that person is so cool. You look at the car and think, wow, if I drove that Ferrari, people would think I am cool.
Which is such a deep irony.
People buy luxury goods to be admired by others, completely oblivious to the fact that everyone is ignoring them, the driver, to admire the object.
It's a total illusion. Spending money to show people how much money you have is the absolute fastest way to have less money. It perfectly sets up the ultimate irony of finance. True wealth is actually what you don't see.
Consider the diet versus exercise analogy. Vigorous exercise is like a high income. You put in the work, your heart rate is up, and it feels highly visible and productive.
Right.
But it is incredibly easy to undo a 500-calorie workout by eating a 1,000-calorie meal right afterward. Wealth is the self-control to turn down that meal. Wealth is the $100,000 car that was not purchased. It is the diamond watch not bought.
It's the invisible stuff.
Exactly. Wealth consists of the financial assets that have not yet been converted into the visible stuff. And because you can't see it, it is notoriously hard to learn by observing others. You only see their richness, their spending, not their wealth.
So what does this all mean? If the highest dividend money pays isn't a garage full of cars, what is it? The text points to a 1981 study by psychologist Angus Campbell. He found that having a strong sense of controlling your own life is a more dependable predictor of happiness than your salary, your house size, or your job title.
Time is the highest dividend.
Time. And this is more relevant now than ever. Think about John D. Rockefeller in the 1870s. His job was to make decisions. He would literally sit in a chair quietly and think for most of the day.
Which probably looked like he wasn't doing anything.
Exactly. In the 1870s, when everyone else was doing physical, manual labor, that looked incredibly weird. But today, almost all of us are knowledge workers. Our factory is our brain, which means we never truly clock out.
We take our work home with us.
We are processing work in the shower, on the commute, staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. The cognitive load is constant, meaning we have lost control of our time. Therefore, building invisible wealth-saving money without a specific spending goal isn't just about buying a house someday. Unassigned savings buy back the psychological flexibility to take a lower-paying job, or wait for the right opportunity without panic, or simply regain control of your day.
That control, that flexibility, is the ultimate hedge against an unpredictable world.
Let's bring this all home. If there's a cheat sheet to the psychology of money, it's this. Respect the profound role of luck and risk. They are always at play. Aim to be reasonably consistent rather than coldly rational so you can stay in the game long enough for compounding to work its magic. Remember that true wealth is the money you don't spend. And finally, use that unseen wealth to buy back the most valuable asset on earth, your time.
This raises one final critical point from Chapter 12 about how we model the future. We constantly use history to predict what comes next.
Right.
We look at the Great Depression or World War II or 9/11, which, by the way, caused a chain reaction that eventually led to today's massive student loan crisis. And we use these past events to model our worst-case scenarios.
Right.
But there is a massive flaw in that logic. The defining characteristic of every single one of history's worst events is that they were completely unprecedented when they happened. There was no historical model for the Great Depression before it occurred.
What if the biggest risk to your financial future isn't a market crash we can perfectly model on a spreadsheet, but an event that hasn't even been named yet?
Mm.
And what if the only true hedge against a completely unpredictable, unprecedented future is the invisible wealth you build today, simply by keeping your ego in check? Just something to think about the next time you're tempted to buy a Ferrari. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.